All right. Welcome to the Surfliner Sprint 19. This is the second of 3 sprints for the fall work cycle. This one ran from November 16th to November 29th. I want to note that we have one more sprint before everyone breaks for the holidays. Keep that in mind. So for now, I'll hand it over to Tamsin and others who will talk about the work that was done for Comet and shoreline development.
Sure. So I'm going to start with a couple of miscellaneous Comet tickets that got closed. And then I'll talk a little bit sort of secondarily about the Comet shoreline integration that we've been working on and other Comet work that we have in flight for as this sprint wraps up and carrying into the next one. Okay, so first of all, we have a Comet. We had been having some problems with the search index on the various Comet sites. When we deployed them as test sites, they worked okay, but sort of the long running indexes were getting to a point where if you used this primary search box, which routes through the Blacklight platform, that you would find that this didn't work. Some of the other search functionality in Comet was working okay, but this sort of top level, what we're framing as sort of the administrative search was not working all right. So we fixed that this sprint, which I think is a pretty important chunk of work, because we really envision this administrative search being highly functional for a wide variety of use cases. So for instance, we were just having can you edit? We were just having a conversation with Sybil about indexing the pronom IDs for each individual file, so you could use this functionality and the facets to discover what types of files exist in the system and how many of them there are. It was sort of like in lieu of static reporting, you have a live view into the content via the index. So we're excited to see this working again, and it sort of gives us the platform to do administrative search and discovery work more broadly. So one of the things that Gabriella and I have on our to-do list for this week is to sort of review how this is working with respect to the existing index behavior, and open up tickets to close out the rest of sort of an MVP administrative search functionality. I should say that there is also some search behavior through here, which is more object and collection oriented, depending on what dashboard page you're on. Okay, so that's one sort of large bug fix. We did some work around the object structure management, and in addition to the work that we did on this, we also had some conversations about object structure management as a group. So I want to go ahead and so we've got an object with some components here. This one says it should not be destroyed. That's great. I'm going to attach a new component, which we've seen before. Add a thing. Let it be private. Save that. And let's go back to our parent. So this object now has 3 components. It had 2 before. We've added a few things. One is this remove from this object button under the actions column here. The file sets in this object have a sort of drop down that gives you these choices. Since the components just have 1 action available, we just made this a button for now. But if I let's go over to this component, object test component, which should not be destroyed, which is aptly named, because when I click remove this object, so first of all, it's going to warn me that by removing this component from the object, we're not deleting the component, we're just detaching it from the parent. We could refine this text, Gabriella, if this is, I think it's like sort of clear to me, but it could easily be replaced with something slightly different. And we can go okay. And we should see that this component is no longer in this object. But if I sort of, yeah, so this still exists as a thing in the repository. And we haven't changed anything about the files. It's just the membership relation that's been edited here. And then there's a second mechanism for managing components, which has been refined a bit this sprint. And indeed, managing collections here is also possible. So there's this relationships tab in the edit form for an object. So if I want to do sort of structural management of this object, then I can do that here. Let's please ignore find child work. It turns out that this page isn't internationalized and we can't easily change the text on it. I opened a ticket about that this sprint upstream, but I don't think we've done any work on getting that fixed. So let's see. We can re-add our test component here and remove another one. And we could add objects to a collection here as well. So that's sort of the most powerful place that exists right now for managing structural relationships between an object. If I have the object that sort of is central to the relationships, then it's easy to add and remove multiple relationships at that level. One big discussion that we had this sprint was about this items area and some actions that we can take around improving the structural management from here. I think aspirationally, we're really interested in the idea of it being sort of possible to see a deep nested representation of object structure from here. So if you have components that are several layers deep and you want to see all the files that are eventually related to this object through those relationships, that you could see that. We're also interested in making this a little bit more manageable for a case like a book with 400 pages in it, so that you're not seeing a list of those components, but they're a little bit more browsable. And then we also wanted to make it possible for you to see the difference between So this you can sort of tell is a file set just by the way that it's displayed. But we wanted to call out a distinction between the object components, the object members of this object and its files, and make it possible for you to sort of see just one or the other, or see both of them from here. So we scoped out some work for that this sprint, but I think we're still talking about the desirable scope for those kinds of edits. Again, in the long run, I think we're interested in it being possible to sort of see the whole structure at a glance, but we're also looking for sort of easy wins in the short to medium term. Okay, so that's the component stuff. And then we also fixed a bug this sprint about collections. So let's go back to the dashboard. We were having trouble removing objects from collections. And I'm going to go ahead and just remove some here to show that we can do that now. And we've sort of already seen adding an object to a collection. So I won't re-demo that, but as you can see, the collection membership is a little easier to manage from here than it had been in the past. Okay, so that's the sort of completed bug fix work that we did this sprint. Like I said, we had some big conversations about the management of object relationships, and that's something that's sort of ongoing. We also had the first stage of a discussion about the visibility model, and what I mean by the visibility model is, oh, I should pay attention to what I'm doing. I knew that was going to cause an error, and I should have not shown it to you. There's a ticket for that. So by the visibility model, what I mean is these options here. And the conversation that we had this sprint was mainly to get the various stakeholders who are providing input about this visibility structure on the same page about how this all works in practice. There are some complications about how the data model works for these visibilities, and the details of how embargo and lease work. So we did a little getting everybody on the same page in a big meeting this sprint, and I think we have follow-up conversations to have about what the visibility model should look like going forward. It's probable that we'll add some visibilities. I think there's a question about whether these need to be configurable between the campuses, or whether we can agree on a sort of overarching structure for these visibility options. These are sort of a high level way of setting permissions for an object, and there are low level ways of doing it that I think we actually need to do a little bit of work on too, because there's a sharing tab that we have turned off here that I think we could turn back on and have working. So we may slot that work in for this sprint as well. Okay, and So that's this. The other major piece of work that we have, I guess there's two other major pieces of work that I want to call out before we wrap up. One of those is this edit file set page, edit file set ticket. We did some upstream work some time ago, or sort of in an ongoing way, about making this edit file set page work correctly. I guess I need an object with a file in it to do this. Here's one. So we see this doesn't render. That's been the case since we launched Comet, but we put in some upstream work to make it so that this should work. But there's a little bit of there's a few loose ends to tie up that have been sort of challenging to clear. So we're hoping to make it possible for this page to work correctly during the next sprint. And in general, we're sort of interested in the continued work around the edit page or around editing file set relationships as well. We had some additional conversations about this form and how uploads are managed here, as well as about showing in the file set view this one in here, the various files that are in this file set and their uses or types. We're also interested in making those more visible here. So those are also conversations that we had to do some scoping work this sprint. And then last, but definitely not least, there's been a subgroup of us working on the Shoreline platform, and particularly Comet's integration with it. So at its sort of the technical work that has been going on is mainly around upgrading Geo Blacklight to the new 4.0 release. So that work has been happening. Part of both the reason and the implications of that upgrade are that there's a major metadata schema shift that's taking place as part of the 4.0 upgrade. And we decided to take on the work of doing that upgrade as a prerequisite to Comet integration, so that we'd be targeting the new schema and reduce duplicate work there. So we had sort of a sort of prior ingest process in place for the Geo Blacklight 3.0 schema, and instead of making a standalone approach for the new schema aardvark and jumping, sort of doing that work twice, once in a standalone way and once with Comet integration, we decided that it was good to work on those things together. So we had some architectural conversations about how the Geo Blacklight schema or how the Geo Blacklight ingest should work going forward, which parts of it should be tied tightly to Comet, and which parts of it should be detached for users of for users of Shoreline that that might not be using Comet. So we've been interested in supporting the possibility of UCLA reusing parts of our ingest process. So we did sort of answer the questions about how that integration should work. And parts of that, parts of the technical work have been underway. So there's some work mainly on the shoreline side that's been moving forward around that that integration process and ingest process. And in the meanwhile, some work has been happening on the Comet metadata API, the SuperSkunk portion. So you can see this ticket for support the shoreline profile is actually pretty much done, and it's just pending documentation. So we're hoping to close that out today. So that will mean that if you ingest Comet objects with the shoreline metadata profile, that you can export them to shoreline using the Comet metadata API. And a big piece of the work that we have planned for the upcoming sprint is to actually make it possible for you to sort of ingest that content, to answer some of the structural questions about how that content needs to be managed in Comet, and then possibly do the event publishing piece for getting Comet to export data to Shoreline for ingest. So that integration is work that we're continuing into the next sprint. And wow, it turns out there's a lot of stuff that we're doing. I have one more piece to report about that hasn't moved forward a ton in a way that I can show, but that is, I think, poised to be very compelling in our next demo, which is that we have continued to work on the batch upload process through the bulk racks engine. And that is something that we had a lot of technical sort of like low-level code work to do to get that engine integrated to Comet's metadata and file storage platforms. That work has actually moved forward pretty compellingly from my perspective over the last handful of weeks, but there's not a lot that I can demo for you about it just yet. And I'm hoping that we'll have at least some kind of robust bulk racks engine demo before the Christmas holiday and the work cycle wrap up. Gabriella and I are also meeting with the maintainers of that engine actually this afternoon to talk about our goals for it and see what they have to show us as well. I think that's everything. I think that's our sprint that feels much busier and much more productive when I tell it all to you one by one than when I try to keep up with it day to day. And there you go. Is it possible for me to stop screen sharing? Gabriella, do you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, but you may not want to stop screen sharing. Maybe you will. I don't know. It depends on this question. Just wanted to point out that Kelly did ask in chat about, you mentioned earlier that you and I are going to be discussing in this sprint, the administrative search functionality.
Yes.
So she asks that title, administrative search, makes it sound like it's a search available only to like system admins. Is that what is meant there, or are you referring to search for any Comet user?
Yeah, this is search for any Comet user. Thanks for that call out. I should be careful about the word administrative, which does have that connotation. This search is available to anybody who can log into Comet, and it is that what you'll see in this search depends on what you can what you have permissions to access. I think one important thing to call out about the way that it works now, that we may need to discuss, is that the access rules for each type of content do get indexed, and you won't discover things here that you don't have access to read, which is probably appropriate, but it also means that if you're like looking to find out reporting type data out of this, that the scope of that will be sort of automatically limited to the scope of the repository that you have access to as a user. So if you're an admin, then it's everything. If you're not an admin, then it's the things that you have access to.
So going forward, because I know we do reference it as admin search, do we want to agree to something that we can use consistently?
Yeah, let's discuss that. Let's discuss that when we talk about the feature set, Gabriella. Kelly, I'm keen to hear your terminology suggestions as well.
And then before I stop recording, do you want to mention what the focus will be for the last sprint?
Yeah, so I guess for me the main focus is to move forward on the Shoreline integration and to wrap up some demoable version of the bulk racks in bulk ingest process. So if we could be in a place where there was a clearly defined set of work needed to get the Shoreline ingest integration flowing for both campuses, and we could do some kind of ingest using bulk racks, I'd be pretty happy with the outcomes for the holiday.
I totally agree. That'll be awesome. All right, I think that wraps it up. Unless anybody has questions that we feel need to be folded into this recording, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to pause or stop recording. No one? All right. Oh, here's a question. No, it's okay, Kelly. It might be something we want to record. On removal of components, what would you like to know, Kelly? You could type it in. Oh, you could talk. Oh, there you are.
Okay, so is there a history maintained of what object the component was previously connected to? Because my concern is that if you can disassociate components from objects, but it's not actually deleting them, we could end up with a bunch of just components floating around out there, and without the context of what objects they were associated with, or if they're no longer even associated with like the collection, it could be difficult to tell where they came from or even what they are.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So I will say that it is possible, of course, to just delete a component. So that's a thing that you can do. Right now, to answer your question flatly, the answer is no, there's not a history of structural relationships. What we do, though, is that when these edits are happening, there's an internal event that's triggered, and the behavior like indexing sort of hangs off of that event. So there's a sort of like the metadata membership updated for object one. And we don't keep an audit log of those events now. But I think that we're engaged. Well, I don't think that we're engaged in it. We're engaged in conversations around the preservation use cases for tracking that kind of event data. And I suspect that this concern is going to come up in that context as well. So I do think that it's probably, the answer is no, we don't keep that kind of data. And yes, right now, if I just like take component 2 and detach it from the object that it's attached to, it's going to still be called component 2, and you're not really going to be able to tell what it was a component of unless you have that context. But I do think that that's a problem that we should resolve from the preservation event tracking standpoint. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. I just put a little follow-up in the chat, but
I can't see the chat.
It might be covered with those further conversations. If there's a way to locate any components that are like orphaned in that way, to search for components that are not associated with an object.
Let's continue this conversation out of band, because I think there are some, like this goes back to the structural editing conversation that you were a part of. So I feel like there's questions that need to be addressed around like the fact that this was once a component and is called component 2 doesn't mean anything about its status. Like it's not a component in terms of the object model. It was a component because it was a member of another object. But even though it's called component 2, if I detach it from its object, it's right. The component, its componentness is a relationship, not a like ontologically primary thing about it.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. I will stop recording.
Okay.